Good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to discuss a topic that combines emotional intelligence with neuroscience, psychology with biology, the super empathing, the one person a narcissist can't control. Now, let's set the stage with a clear understanding of two polar forces in human behavior, narcissism and empathy. On one end, the narcissistic, highly self-involved, often manipulative, skilled at reading emotional keys not to connect, but to control. On the other, the empath, deeply intuitive, emotionally intelligent, often absorbing the emotions of others as if they were their own. Empathy is often seen as a superpower, the ability to feel what others feel, to walk in someone else's emotional shoes. But without regulation, empathy can become a weakness, especially in the presence of manipulative personalities like narcissists. What distinguishes the super empath from the typical empath is not that they feel more, but that they manage what they feel with precision. This difference, subtle as it may seem, is grounded in one of the most important psychological skills a person can develop, the emotional regulation. To understand this, we need to first look at how emotional resonance works. When someone near us is experiencing strong emotions, anger, sadness, elation, our brain's mirror neuron system activates. This is a biological mechanism that allows us to instinctively mirror the emotional states of others. It's part of what makes humans social creatures. For empaths, this system is more active than average. They don't just under someone is upset. They feel it sometimes even before the person is consciously aware of it themselves. It's like being an emotional tuning fork. This resonance, however, comes with a cost. If not balanced, it can lead to emotional enmeshment, overwhelm, and susceptibility to manipulation. How do we enter emotional regulation? The super empath's true power. Emotional regulation refers to the brain's ability to recognize an emotion, pause, assess its origin, and respond in a controlled and deliberate way. This is the domain of the prefrontal cortex, the most evolved part of the brain. The prefrontal cortex helps us slow down automatic emotional responses and create a gap between stimulus and reaction. In that space, conscious choice becomes possible. For most empaths, the emotional signal from another person comes in strong. It hits the limbic system, the brain's emotional center, like a wave. If they're not aware of what's happening, they get swept away by it, reacting emotionally to someone else's unspoken inner storm. The narcissist, who often intuitively understands this dynamic, thrives in this space. They use subtle cues, tone, body language, microexpressions to send strong emotional signals. They bait guilt, flatter, or provoke, depending on what keeps their target off balance. But the super empath doesn't drown in these emotional currents. Instead, they feel the wave but stay anchored. How? Because they've developed interoceptive awareness, the ability to sense and interpret their own internal bodily signals. They notice the quickening of the heart, the knot in the stomach, the shift in breathing, and instead of reacting, they observe. This awareness creates the first line of defense against emotional manipulation. It's like a dashboard light going off, not to signal a problem, but to prompt a check-in. This is where neuroscience becomes empowering. When the super empath detects an emotional spike, how do we? They don't ask, what's wrong with me? They ask, what am I picking up that may not be mine? That question shifts them from absorption to observation, from enmeshment to clarity. They are still deeply empathic. They feel everything, but they have trained themselves to feel without becoming consumed. This is not about suppression or detachment. It's about presence. It's about feeling fully without giving up sovereignty. The difference is critical when dealing with narcissists. A narcissist often seeks to destabilize others to maintain control. They create confusion through gaslighting, shifting blame, or emotional outbursts. When someone lacks emotional regulation, they absorb this chaos and internalize it. They start questioning their reality, doubting their instincts, and surrendering their personal boundaries. But the super empath remains grounded. They might feel the narcissist's rage or sadness, but they don't personalize it. They understand it's a projection, a strategy, not a truth. This clarity allows them to respond with calm, assertiveness, and precision. Regulation also creates an inner calm that disrupts the narcissist dynamic. Narcissists rely on reactions. They thrive on drama, on pulling strings and watching others dance. But when their tactics are met with stillness, with measured responses instead of emotional explosions, the power dynamic collapses. The narcissist is left with nothing to grip, nothing to twist. The super empath, through regulation, becomes emotionally non-reactive, not cold, but clear. This kind of resilience is not innate, it's trained. Through practices like mindfulness, breathwork, journaling, and cognitive reframing, the super empath strengthens the neural pathways that support regulation. They develop what psychologists call flexibility, the ability to choose how to respond rather than react impulsively. Over time, this creates emotional autonomy. And autonomy is kryptonite to a narcissist. In the end, emotional regulation is the bridge between empathy and empowerment. It's the key that turns emotional sensitivity from a liability into a strength. It is what it allows the super empath to feel deeply without being ruled by what they feel. And in doing so, they become immune to the narcissist's control, not through force, but through clarity, balance, and the unwavering ownership of their own emotional state. When we talk about emotional mastery, psychological resilience, and the ability to stand firm in the face of manipulation, what we're really talking about is the strength and functionality of the prefrontal cortex. This region of the brain, located just behind the forehead, is often considered the control center for higher order thinking. It's responsible for decision-making, impulse control, social behavior, emotional regulation, and self-awareness. In the context of narcissistic manipulation and empathic sensitivity, the prefrontal cortex becomes a critical asset, especially for the super empath, who doesn't just feel deeply, also thinks clearly. Narcissists tend to operate from a place of emotional reactivity and calculated manipulation. Their behavioral strategies are often driven by insecurity, masked by overconfidence, and enacted through rapid, instinctual patterns routed in the limbic system, specifically the amygdala. This part of the brain is responsible for emotional responses, particularly those related to threat, fear, and aggression. When a narcissist feels their control slipping, they often react impulsively with rage, blame shifting, or guilt tripping. It's a survival mechanism to regain dominance, reestablish control, eliminate perceived threats. For people who are untrained in self-regulation, especially empaths who naturally absorb and respond to emotional energy, these behaviors can be overwhelming. They trigger stress responses that bypass rational thought. In moments of emotional chaos, the body floods with cortisol and adrenaline, preparing for fight, flight, or freeze. This is where many people get pulled into the narcissist's emotional vortex. They react, argue, defend, or retreat, exactly the responses the narcissist expects and thrives on. But the super empath has developed a different kind of neurological wiring. Through conscious training, experience, or sometimes even necessity, they've activated it and strengthened their frontal cortex to override immediate emotional impulses. When the narcissist lashes out or manipulates, the super empath's brain doesn't default to panic or defensiveness. Instead, the prefrontal cortex kicks in with curiosity, perspective, and strategy. It slows the moment down. It asks, what is really happening here? Rather than reacting automatically. That split-second pause is where power is regained. This mental pause isn't a matter of suppressing emotion, it's about regulating it. The super empath still feels the emotional charge of a situation. But then observe the feeling without becoming it. That's a function of executive control, another domain of the prefrontal cortex. Executive control allows the individual to consider multiple outcomes, suppress unhelpful reactions, and choose the most adaptive response. In practical terms, it means that when a narcissist tries to provoke guilt or rage, the super empath doesn't flinch. They maintain composure, think critically, and stay aligned with their values instead of being dragged into emotional chaos. There's a deeper layer to this advantage. The prefrontal cortex is also responsible for ethical reasoning and long-term thinking. While narcissists often operate in the short term, seeking immediate gratification or dominance, the super empath is guided by a larger framework. They consider the long-term consequences of their responses. They ask, is this a pattern? What's the cost of engaging? What serves my integrity? This ability to zoom out and see the big picture provides emotional insulation against the narcissist push and pull tactics. Moreover, the super empath's use of the prefrontal cortex helps them remain grounded in reality. Narcissists often attempt to distort reality through gaslighting, revisionist history, or shifting blame. They thrive in confusion. But the super empath can mentally catalog interactions, spot inconsistencies, and challenge false narratives. Their ability to remember and analyze past events with clarity disrupts the narcissist's attempts to reframe or manipulate the story. This clarity creates another layer of protection, self-trust. When the prefrontal cortex is active and dominant, it reinforces accurate self-perception and critical thinking. The super empath doesn't rely on external validation to know what they feel or what they experienced. They anchor their reality in logic and introspection, not in the narcissist's approval. That autonomy makes manipulation nearly impossible because the narcissist's main weapon, control through confusion, loses its edge. It's important to note that developing the prefrontal cortex's capabilities isn't an abstract concept. It's supported by consistent practices. Mindfulness, reflective journaling, cognitive restructuring, and even quality sleep and nutrition all contribute to its strength. Neuroplasticity ensures that with repetition and intention, the brain rewires itself. The super empath isn't superhuman. They are simply someone who has learned to train their brain to serve their highest self. In a world where manipulation is often subtle and psychological warfare occur behind polite smiles, the real advantage isn't brute strength or emotional numbness. It's the ability to stay calm, think clearly, and act with integrity. The prefrontal cortex gives the super empath this edge. It allows them to be compassionate without being naive, emotionally attuned without being exploited, and present without being reacted. In the end, this neurological sophistication is what allows them to face the narcissist and remain entirely unshaken. Mirror neurons are a fascinating feature of the human brain, responsible for our ability to empathize, understand, and connect with the emotions and actions of others. These neurons, first discovered in the early 1990s, fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing the same action. They play a central role in how we learn, imitate, and empathize with others. However, for the super empath, mirror neurons serve a deeper function. They don't just feel others' emotions, they also begin to recognize patterns within these emotional cues. This pattern recognition ability gives the super empath a unique edge in navigating complex social dynamics, especially when interacting with manipulative personalities like narcissists. When someone expresses an emotion, whether through facial expressions, body language, or tone of voice, mirror neurons allow us to experience that emotion ourselves to a degree. This is what allows us to truly feel what another person is going through. It's why we might tear up when we watch a sad movie or feel a rush of excitement when a friend receives good news. The brain, through the activation of mirror neurons, connects us with others on an emotional level. For the empath, this ability is heightened. They can often pick on the emotional states of others instinctively, even when those emotions are subtle or unspoken. However, the super empath goes beyond mere emotional resonance. While they still experience this deep connection to others' emotions, they also engage in a form of cognitive processing that allows them to analyze and understand these emotional signals in a more structured, almost analytical way. This is where pattern recognition comes in. The super empath does not only absorb and mirror emotions, they observe and identify recurring emotional patterns in their environment, especially in the behaviors of people around them. Narcissists, in particular, rely heavily on emotional manipulation and the distortion of reality to maintain control. They use a mix of subtle tactics, gaslighting, guilt tripping, and emotional outbursts to keep others off balance and emotionally reactive. They thrive in situations where there's confusion and uncertainty. For the average person, these tactics might be difficult to recognize, especially if they're happening gradually over time. But for the super empath, their enhanced ability to recognize patterns within the emotional cues of others gives them a distinct advantage. The super empath begins to see through the narcissist's emotional fluctuations. They detect inconsistencies between what a narcissist says and how they behave, between their words and their emotional expressions. This ability to spot contradictions and behavioral patterns is grounded in the functioning of mirror neurons, but it's also bolstered by a keen sense of observation and memory. As the super empath interacts with the narcissist over time, they start to map out the emotional behaviors and manipulative tactics the narcissist tends to employ. They recognize the cyclical nature of these tactics, the subtle shifts in tone, the familiar gaslighting techniques, the emotional withdrawal followed by sudden charm. With each encounter, these patterns become more apparent, and the super empath becomes better equipped to recognize when they are being manipulated. This pattern recognition skill helps the super empath resist the narcissist's emotional control, whereas most people might feel confused or doubt their perception when a narcissist shifts from praise to criticism or from charm to hostility. The super empath sees it as part of a predictable cycle. They understand that the narcissist's outbursts or passive-aggressive behavior aren't personal. They are merely strategies designed to regain control. By recognizing this pattern, the super empath is less likely to get caught up in the narcissist's emotional turbulence. Instead of reacting emotionally, they stay calm and maintain their boundaries, knowing that the narcissist's behavior is rooted in a predictable and unhealthy pattern. Beyond simply protecting themselves from narcissistic manipulation, this ability to recognize patterns gives the super empath a deeper understanding of human behavior in general. Their heightened emotional intelligence allows them to spot similar patterns in other people's actions, helping them navigate a wide range of social interactions with greater ease. They can read a room quickly, identify underlying tensions, and adjust their approach accordingly. This skill is invaluable not just in managing relationships with narcissists, but in any environment where understanding others' emotions and behaviors is critical. One of the most powerful aspects of the super empath's pattern recognition ability is that it is not limited to negative emotional manipulation. They can also identify when is genuinely expressing love or concern, even if that person's or actions don't perfectly align with their emotional expression. The super empath's ability to track emotional patterns helps them discern authenticity from manipulation. This awareness helps them engage more deeply with people who are emotionally healthy and avoid becoming entangled in toxic dynamics. The power of mirror neurons and pattern recognition is, how do we, at its core, about awareness. It's about seeing through the surface and understanding the deeper currents of human behavior. For the super empath, these skills allow them to walk through life with a clarity that most people don't possess. They don't just feel, they understand. And in understanding, they protect themselves from being manipulated while also deepening their connections with others. It's this combination of emotional resonance and cognitive awareness that makes the super empath a uniquely powerful force in relationships. Boundaries are an essential component of psychological health and being, particularly when it comes to protecting oneself from emotional manipulation and stress. For the super empath, boundaries are not just abstract psychological concepts, they are physiological signals deeply woven into the fabric of the body's biofeedback system. Biofeedback, a term typically used to describe the process of gaining greater awareness and control over physiological functions, is critical in understanding how boundaries function in the context of emotional regulation. For a super empath, boundaries are not merely about saying no. To others, they represent a fundamental process by which the body communicates its emotional limits, and when those limits are breached, it sends a clear signal to the mind. At the most basic level, the human body operates as a finely tuned system of biofeedback mechanisms, continuously relaying information to the brain about what is happening within it. When we experience stress, anxiety, or discomfort, whether from external emotional pressures or internal conflicts, our body sends signals in the form of increased heart rate, shallow breathing, muscle tension, or changes in gut function. These signals are the body's way of alerting us to emotional and psychological imbalances that require attention. The super empath, whose sensitivity to others' emotional states is heightened, becomes acutely attuned to these signals. Their ability to discern what is truly their own emotional experience and what has been absorbed from others relies on this body-based biofeedback system. When a narcissist or other manipulative individual comes into the picture, they often push boundaries, whether overtly or subtly, in order to regain control or to manipulate others into meeting their needs. Narcissists tend to exploit the empathy of others, using guilt, charm, anger, or confusion to bend others to their will. They aim to destabilize the emotional landscape of those around them, triggering a cascade of emotional responses that can make it difficult for the individual to maintain their own sense of self. For most people, these emotional assaults can be overwhelming, and without a strong sense of self and well-established boundaries, they can become easily lost in the chaos. However, the super empath, who has learned to develop strong internal boundaries, uses their body's biofeedback system as a built-in defense mechanism. The moment a narcissist begins to push, the empath's body responds. Subtle signals, like an increase in heart rate or a sense of tightness in the chest, serve as an early warning system that something is out of alignment. This physiological response is the body's way of signaling a breach in emotional boundaries. The super empath, having developed greater awareness of these signals, doesn't diss them or suppress them. Instead, they recognize these signs as biofeedback that requires immediate attention. For example, if a narcissist begins to make unreasonable demands, use guilt, or manipulate a situation to make the super empath feel responsible for their emotions, the empath may begin to feel a subtle discomfort in their body. Perhaps a tightening of the stomach, a sense of dread, or an increase in tension around the neck and shoulders. These physical sensations are biofeedback telling the empath that they are being pushed beyond their emotional limits. In response, the super empath can pause and assess the situation. Instead of immediate reacting or giving in, they can use this physiological cue to slow down, take a deep breath, and consciously set a boundary. The act of setting that boundary, whether verbally or emotionally, is an important step in reclaiming control. But what's remarkable is that the process of setting boundaries also provides immediate relief to the body. When the super empath asserts their boundaries, whether through a firm no or a clear verbal statement, the body receives a signal that the threat has been neutralized. This often leads to a noticeable reduction in stress and physiological tension. Heart rate slows, breathing becomes deeper and more even, and muscle tension begins to ease. This is the body's biofeedback response to the restoration of emotional autonomy. For the super empath, this internal feedback loop is not just about protection, it's about empowerment. The ability to read and respond to the body's cues is a form of regulation that strengthens with practice. As the super empath sets and enforces boundaries over time, they learn to trust their body signals more deeply. They no longer need to second guess themselves when a situation feels off or when someone crosses an emotional line. The body becomes a trusted guide, offering clear, actionable feedback that can be relied upon. The act of setting boundaries is not a one-time event. It's a continuous process of maintaining one's emotion health and integrity. The super empath does not wait for a full-blown emotional crisis to set boundaries. Instead, they become increasingly attuned to the subtle shifts in their own emotional landscape, using their body's biofeedback to stay in a state of awareness. So how do we, if they notice even a slight change in how they feel, whether it's an increase in tension, anxiety, or frustration, they use it as a cue to check in with themselves and assess whether their boundaries are being respected. This ongoing monitoring and adjustment help the super empath maintain a healthy balance between openness to others and self-protection. In relationships, especially those involving narcissistic manipulation, boundaries can sometimes feel like a battleground. The narcissist may push, challenge, or test the super empath's limits, but the super empath, having developed a deep connection to their body's biofeedback system, knows that their boundaries are non-negotiable. They have learned that boundaries are not about controlling others, but about protecting their own emotional space and maintaining their sense of self. In this way, boundaries serve as a powerful form of self-care. They are not just defensive mechanisms, but proactive tools that help the super empath maintain emotional balance, avoid burnout, and preserve their mental and physical health. The body's biofeedback system becomes a constant reminder of where the empath's limits lie, offering them a clear, the ever-present guide to navigating relationships and staying true to themselves in the face of emotional turbulence. Trauma transmutation is a powerful and transformative process through which individuals take the painful, often overwhelming experiences of trauma and convert them into sources of personal growth, strength, and resilience. Rather than being defined by the pain of past experiences, individuals who engage in trauma transmutation find ways to use that very pain to fuel their healing, understanding, and even their purpose. It's a journey of not just overcoming trauma, but transcending it, reshaping it into something meaningful and empowering. This concept, though deeply personal, resonates with many who seek to make sense of their suffering and create something positive from it. At the core of trauma transmutation is the idea that trauma doesn't have to be a permanent mark on one's life. While it may shape aspects of one's identity, it doesn't have to define them entirely. Trauma can be seen as a catalyst for change. This doesn't mean denying the pain or pretending it didn't happen. Instead, it's about finding a way to process and integrate the experience, understanding its impact without letting it control or limit one's future. Trauma transmutation involves acknowledging the hurt, the betrayal, the loss, or the fear, but choosing to learn from it, use it, and eventually release its grip. The process begins with awareness. Trauma, especially unprocessed trauma, can remain buried deep in the subconscious, affecting behaviors, emotions, and relationships in ways that may not always be immediately apparent. The first step in transmuting trauma is recognizing its presence and impact. This often requires deep introspection and sometimes external support, such as therapy or journaling, to uncover the layers of emotional and psychological wounds. It's not uncommon for trauma to manifest in physical symptoms. Chronic insomnic pain, digestive issues, or emotional patterns like anxiety, depression, or feelings of disconnection from others. Becoming aware of these symptoms is a key signal that trauma might be at the root of the issue. Once trauma is acknowledged, the next step is understanding its source and impact. Trauma transmutation doesn't involve intellectualizing the pain away, but instead deeply feeling and examining it. What were the circumstances that led to the traumatic event? How did it affect your sense of safety, trust, self-worth, or identity? This step often involves processing intense emotions. Grief, anger, confusion, shame, and giving them space to exist. Healing trauma is not about avoiding or suppressing these emotions. It's about creating a safe environment to feel them, understand them, and then work through them. One of the most powerful aspects of trauma transmutation is the idea of reframing. Reframing involves shifting one's perspective on the trauma itself. Instead of seeing it as something that happened to you, you begin to view it as something that happened for you, for your growth. This shift in perspective doesn't invalidate the pain or excuse of the actions those who caused harm. Rather, it invites the individual to explore how the experience can shape their future. For example, someone who has experienced betrayal may, through trauma transmutation, develop a deeper understanding of trust, recognize their own resilience, and even find ways to build stronger, more authentic connections in their future relationships. This reframing is an integral part of the healing process as it empowers the individual to take control of the narrative and reshape their identity. Another crucial element in trauma transmutation is the act of integration. Trauma is not something that can be simply fixed or erased. Instead, it becomes part of the person's story, but it does not have to dominate or define it. Integration involves finding a way to accept the trauma as part of one's life experience, learning from it, and finding ways to use it for personal growth. This process may involve developing new coping mechanisms, adopting healthier thought patterns, or embracing new perspectives on life. In essence, the person learns to live alongside their trauma, not in fear of it, but with an understanding that it has become a source of wisdom and strength. A key component of transmuting trauma is self-compassion. Trauma can leave individuals with a harsh inner critic, feelings of shame, or self-blame. Through trauma transmutation, individuals learn to soften their self-talk, offer themselves kindness, and understand that their responses to trauma were survival mechanisms. This shift from self-blame to self-compassion is often a turning point in healing as it allows individuals to release guilt and embrace self-acceptance. This compassionate inner dialogue is essential in transforming trauma from a source of shame into a source of empowerment. Trauma transmutation is also deeply connected to the concept of purpose. Many people find that their traumatic experiences lead them to a deeper understanding of their passions, values, and goals. After enduring significant pain, individuals often have a desire to help others, create meaningful change, or find ways to contribute to the world. This sense of purpose can be a powerful tool in transforming trauma. By using one's experiences to help others or to advocate for a cause, trauma can be turned into a force for good, not only in the individual's life, but also in the lives of others. This shift is one of the most profound aspects of trauma transmutation as it turns suffering into a springboard for growth and service. Ultimately, trauma transmutation is about empowerment. It's about reclaiming control over one's life, understanding that we cannot always control what happens to us. We can control how we respond. By transforming trauma, we don't just heal from the pain, we use it as a foundation to build a new, more resilient version of ourselves. This doesn't mean forgetting or erasing the past, but rather integrating it in a way that allows us to move forward with wisdom, strength, and purpose. Trauma becomes no longer a source of suffering, but a key ingredient in the creation of a more empowered, authentic, and fulfilled self. Through this process, individuals learn that their greatest source of power comes not from avoiding trauma, but from transmuting it into something that propels them toward greater personal growth, connection, and service to the world. Autonomy over approval is a concept that speaks to the profound from seeking external validation to embracing an internal sense of self-worth and independence. It's the ability to trust and value oneself without relying on the approval or acceptance of others to define one's identity, decisions, or emotional well-being. In a world where social dynamics often revolve around approval, whether from peers, family, or societal norms, learning to prioritize autonomy over approval becomes a crucial skill for maintaining emotional resilience, cultivating authentic self-expression, and building a life that aligns with one's rather than the expectations of others. For many, the need for approval is deeply ingrained from an early age. Children often learn to gain affection or approval through compliance with others' desires or expectations. This might manifest as a desire to meet parental expectations, excel in school to gain praise, or conform to societal standards in order to fit in. While seeking approval is a natural part of human development and helps foster connections, over time, it can create a dependency on external sources of validation. People become conditioned to shape their identity and choices based on what others think rather than what they feel is truly right for them. When someone prioritizes approval over autonomy, they often find themselves at the mercy of other people's opinions. Their decisions become driven by fear of judgment or rejection, and their emotional state may fluctuate depending on the feedback they receive from others. This constant cycle of seeking validation can be emotionally draining, as it places one's self-worth in the hands of others who may or may not understand or appreciate the person's true essence. Living in this state of external validation can create feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, and a lack of fulfillment. This is because in the pursuit of approval, individuals may sacrifice their authenticity, their values, and even their long-term happiness in favor of short-term emotional rewards. The shift from approval seeking to autonomy involves a fundamental change in how one views themselves. It requires cultivating self-awareness and emotional intelligence to recognize when the desire for approval is motivating one's actions. Autonomy begins with the practice of self-acceptance, which is the foundation for building self-trust and emotional independence. when an individual accepts themselves. Flaws, imperfections, strengths, and vulnerabilities, they are no longer reliant on the praise or criticism of others to feel worthy. Instead, they start to source their sense of value from within. Grounding their self-worth in their own beliefs, achievements, and inherent qualities. This journey toward autonomy also is developing the courage to make decisions based on one's own values, desires, and priorities, even if it means going against the grain or defying societal norms. It requires the bravery to take actions that may not be universally approved of or understood, but align with one's deeper sense of purpose. Choosing autonomy over approval is not about rejecting connection or the feedback of others. It's about recognizing that one's happiness and fulfillment are not contingent on seeking or receiving approval. A key aspect of this shift is learning to manage external opinions without letting them dictate personal actions. It's possible to consider others' perspectives without internalizing them as truth or allowing them to influence one's own decisions. When we choose autonomy, we begin to separate our sense of self from the judgments of others. This practice enables us to respond to feedback with a discerning mind, taking in constructive criticism when appropriate while disregarding unnecessary or unhelpful opinions. It is about filtering out what matters and letting go of the rest, creating space for personal growth and emotional freedom. One of the most liberating aspects of choosing autonomy over approval is the ability to set clear and healthy boundaries. When approval seeking governs actions, boundaries tend to blur. People may overcommit themselves, tolerate behaviors they don't like, or compromise on their values in order to avoid conflict or gain acceptance. With autonomy, boundaries become a protective measure for maintaining emotional integrity. The individual recognizes their right to say no, to express their needs, and to honor their feelings without fear of rejection or disapproval. This boundary setting enables individuals to preserve their energy and emotional well-being, ultimately leading to healthier relationships and greater personal satisfaction. Autonomy also fosters resilience in the face of adversity. When external validation no longer holds primary importance, individuals become less vulnerable to the opinions or judgments of others. Rejection or criticism no longer carries the weight of personal failure. Instead, it is seen as an opportunity for growth or simply a reflection of someone else's perspective. This emotional detachment from approval allows individuals to persist through challenges, make decisions with greater clarity, and recover more quickly from setbacks. They are empowered by the knowledge that their worth not depend on others' approval, but on their ability to trust and stand by themselves. Furthermore, autonomy allows for the pursuit of personal goals and passions without the fear of judgment. People who prioritize approval may set their true desires or talents if they fear they won't be accepted or understood. Autonomy liberates them from these constraints, encouraging them to pursue what excites them, what feels authentic, and what aligns with their inner truth. This unfiltered expression brings a deep sense of fulfillment and joy, as individuals are able to live their lives according to design rather than a script written by external forces. Ultimately, autonomy over approval is a practice of self-liberation. It's about reclaiming one's power, understanding that approval is fleeting and often based on superficial criteria, while true self-worth is grounded in authenticity and self-respect. Choosing autonomy is an act of self-love, an acknowledgement that value is not contingent on the opinions or acceptance of others, but on the ability to honor and trust oneself. It requires courage, introspection, and a deep commitment to living a life that reflects own values, desires, and unique path. When individuals choose autonomy over approval, they free themselves from the constraints of external validation and open the door to a more fulfilling, empowered existence.